Hello everyone, and welcome to this first video as part of a larger video series really detailing the pharmacology of NSAIDs. NSAIDs are a massive drug class, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But before we really get into the content of this lecture, let's ask ourselves, what is an NSAID? An NSAID is an acronym that stands for Non-steroidal Anti-inflammatory drugs. And I'm actually going to tell you a bit of a story before we get into the really gritty details of this subject. So you'll notice that I took the time to draw this artistic representation of a white willow tree. I'm not sure if this is actually scientifically accurate as to what this looks like, but I thought this was good for the sake of this story. So 500 BCE. This is approximately the time that Hippocrates, a very famous Roman physician, was conducting his studies on certain drugs and looking into different kind of aspects and facets of historic medicine. And in his studies, he came across this white willow tree, and specifically noticed that there was some therapeutic value to the bark of this tree. So let's jump forward to 30 BCE, where we have another famous physician, Celsus, who actually took this bark and distilled it down into tea and used that tea. This is my attempt at drawing a cup of tea. There we go. And used that tea to treat a patient. And he noticed that when the patient drank this tea, there was a reduction in inflammation symptoms. Inflammation. So now we're really going to fast forward a little bit. We're going to fast forward to 1897. So I'll just give you a little bit of context what happened in this little gap here. But scientists eventually isolated the compounds that were responsible for this effect, and they realized that there was quite a bit of gastrointestinal toxicity, and it tasted really awful. And in 1897, a German physician by the name of Felix Hoffmann came into the picture, and actually, I would argue, revolutionized modern medicine with the discovery of acetyl salicylic acid. I think I spelt that with an extra Y. And acetyl salicylic acid is more commonly known as aspirin. So this chemist, Felix Hoffmann, used essentially this huge history of this white willow bark to finally arrive at this compound known as aspirin today. And I left this last little increment to just show that aspirin and NSAIDs have been a huge money-making drug class for the pharmaceutical industry. And not only that, but they remain one of the most commonly prescribed drugs and most available drugs over the counter to date in kind of current medicine. So let's really look at this class now more formally. So I've made this claim that these NSAIDs are phenomenal drugs, but what do they do? What do they do? Well, there are three main functions or effects that are observed when patients take NSAIDs and use NSAIDs. The first is analgesia. And analgesia refers to a reduction in the perception of pain. Reduction in, I'm speaking something and writing something completely different. Perception of pain. So what's important to note here is that there is actually no loss of the initial kind of etiology or cause of that pain. So let's say, for example, you sprain your ankle. By taking an NSAID, you'll feel better because there's a reduction in your perception of pain, but the pain itself, the source of the pain, the sprain, is not actually different by taking these drugs. The second feature clinically of NSAIDs is antipyresis. And antipyresis refers to a reduction in fever. And specifically, fever refers to an increase in the thermal set point of the body. And I'm going to do a whole video on this mechanism, so don't worry about this right now. But essentially, the molecule responsible for the increase in the thermal set point of the body, this is all in the central nervous system, is actually inhibited by the NSAIDs. So as a result of getting rid of the molecule, you now have a reduction in the thermal set point back to normal. And the final thing is sort of self-explanatory in the name, but anti-inflammation. And that refers to overall, for example, if I sprain my ankle, there would be a reduction in the inflammation that I would observe from that sprain. The last thing that I want to do is just talk about what exactly this non-steroidal part of the anti-inflammatory drugs refers to. So in the body, and also what we can get through synthetic chemistry for designing drugs, are a class of compounds known as corticosteroids. And corticosteroids are also anti-inflammatory molecules, but they sort of share this cholesterol-like structure. And I'm just drawing the carbon backbone here. This is something purely if you're interested and curious as to why it's non-steroidal. So this carbon backbone, these ring structures here, they are common to this corticosteroid drug class. But when we look at NSAIDs, there is actually no ring structure, or no ring structure that resembles this classic steroidal structural landmark. So that's what the non-steroidal refers to. And before I end this video, I'd just like to write the name down of a couple of kind of famous drugs in this drug class that we'll talk about in subsequent videos. So I've already mentioned aspirin. I'll write that down again, but ibuprofen is another huge one. Aspirin, ibuprofen, what else am I looking for? Naltrexone, diclofenac, etc. And the final thing that I want to mention is there is a drug called acetaminophen. And in the UK and in Europe, this is called paracetamol. But acetaminophen is it's always been the black sheep of this group. It's not a classic non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, but as I mentioned, this has only been for an introduction to the drug class. And so in subsequent videos, I'll talk about things like, well, what's the mechanism of action through which these drugs work? Why is aspirin taken as a blood thinner in quotations? What is acetaminophen and why is that kind of the black sheep of this family? What is cyclooxygenase? What is a prostaglandin? These might be questions that you've already addressed or will address, but we will certainly get to them in subsequent videos. Anyways, have a great day. I hope you enjoyed that lecture, and we'll see you soon.